Hey, it's me. The Thing. It's been a while. You can tell because of my hair and the new microphone. It makes a weird sound every time I take it off the tripod, so I have to just hold the tripod. It's been a while because I'm a horrible perfectionist, and as much as I love posting videos, I also hate posting videos. But a video by small YouTuber Meredith Novico, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, girl, just came out about the shame of posting, and I was like, she's so real for that. I feel like everything I post has to be big and magnificent and say something, and it's hard to do that. Not every video can be a banger, so I'm just going to do something fun and get me back in the spirit of posting. So today we'll talk about every book I read during Lent. Lent is a period of 40 days in between Ash Wednesday and Easter, and the typical Lent observance is to abstain from meat and other various forms of fasting. However, I can't really do that. It is known that I have eating issues. Fasting from food is not a very good idea for me. Typically, I'll do something else for Lent. One year, I just didn't buy anything, aside from like groceries and gas. Another year, I fasted completely from YouTube, and this year, I upped that and fasted from social media and the internet. And I did not intend to read 1 billion books while I was fasting from the internet. It just kind of happened that way. So I'm going to talk about all the books that I read. Now, a lot of it is manga, but there's also contemporary novels, classic novels. This is not in any sort of order. It's just the order that I wrote it down in. Starting with the Hunter x Hunter manga. Now, I did not read the whole thing. I just picked up from where the 2011 anime ends and read up until the most recent chapters. So I had rewatched Hunter x Hunter 2011 and then watched Hunter x Hunter 1999 1 week during Lent when I was sick and stuck in bed. I rewatched most of 2011 because I skipped the Chimera Ant arc because I hate the Chimera Ant arc. And I know that that's an unpopular opinion, but like, I do not like it. But I loved the Succession arc in the manga. I guess you could draw some similarities between that and the Chimera Ant arc because they're both very complex and very long and have a lot of different characters and a lot of different moving parts. I just think that the Succession arc is so much more interesting. I'm going to be kind of vague for people that haven't read the Hunter x Hunter manga. Basically, the Succession arc is about the multitudinous children of a king of a foreign country that are all vying for the throne, and only the sole survivor of all of them will inherit the throne, but they're not allowed to like directly kill one another. So it's very like espionage, political intrigue type of thing. And some of the princes are like straight up babies, and there's other ones that are like insane bloodthirsty monsters, and then there's some that are like pacifists that don't want to kill anyone. It doesn't feel very Hunter x Hunter, but it's a lot of fun. Gon and Killua are not really in it because they were so much in the Chimera Ant arc, and so the main character of the Succession arc is Kurapika. I think that Togashi is insane for writing the Succession arc so complex and so long when he is constantly having to go on hiatus because of his chronic pain, and I think that he's insane for writing something so ambitious that's going to take him like 10 years to finish, but I applaud it because I really enjoyed the Succession arc. But before the Succession arc was the Hisoka and Chrollo fight in the Heavens Arena. Girl, why does Togashi draw Hisoka like that? It was crazy. Chrollo gets his nen back and then they fight in the Heavens Arena. And I understand why some people might be upset with the way that it ends. It feels a little bit cheap, but I don't care. I just had so much fun with it. I'm not gonna like rank these. Oh, maybe I should. Okay, if there's an imaginary tier list, I would put it at the A tier. I believe the next thing I read was The Giver. So this is probably my least favorite thing that I read. I didn't dislike it. I just liked everything else better. So it's one of those classic novels that a lot of kids read in school, and I just never got assigned it in school for some reason, and I saw it on the shelf and I was like, oh, I should probably read that because it's kind of the predecessor to a lot of dystopian young adult fiction. Unfortunately, I already knew the twist. I guess spoilers for The Giver, but I already knew the twist about the colors. So I was trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who didn't know it and like how shocking it would be to realize that there have been no color descriptions up until the point where Jonas realizes that color exists. So I think it was very well done and very well written because I don't think that I would have noticed that there was no use or writing of color. It's very short. I read it all in one sitting. I do appreciate any sort of story that has something to say about human dignity and the role of suffering in our lives. I could see how that story would mess up a lot of people, reading it as young kids in school. But I will put it at C tier because it was good. But I do wish that I had just read it when I was younger because I think it would have blown me away. C tier is not like bad. It's just like middle of the road. Speaking of the road, I have often said that The Road by Cormac McCarthy is my favorite novel. I read it for the first time in 2020 when I was a Barnes & Noble employee, and ever since then I've said that it's my favorite book, and I keep it up on that shelf with my special little books. It doesn't go here with all my other books. And so I was thinking about how The Road is my favorite book, but then I was like, I couldn't tell you like anything that happens in it, really. I should reread it. It's about a man and a boy in a post-apocalyptic world following the road trying to survive. No plant or animal life is left, and so they just have to scavenge out of like old cans and whatever they can find left over from civilization, and there's like roaming bands of cannibals around. It doesn't sound maybe like anything special, but Cormac McCarthy's writing is just incredible. I love when people are such good writers that they can do away with convention. He hardly uses punctuation. That was the first Cormac McCarthy book I read, and since then I've also read No Country for Old Men and Blood Meridian, and so I felt like having a little bit more McCarthy under my belt helped me to appreciate The Road more. Cormac McCarthy does this thing where a theme that he presents in one of his books will be expanded upon in the next book. So The Road directly followed No Country. There's no relation to them. They're completely different genres. But at the end of No Country for Old Men, he introduces this theme of carrying the fire. And that is like the central theme of The Road. And carrying the fire means committing to goodness despite the evil all around you. And carrying that torch that the people that have gone before you have passed on to you, so that the people who come after you can follow that torch and you can pass it back on to them, and imbue that with meaning and hope, trusting in the living who follow you to find meaning in your life and in the legacy that they have now become a part of. That is the sole method in which we can rebel against this cruel world. I think everyone should read The Road at least once. Even if you don't like it, I think you should at least try it. It's one of the most accessible Cormac McCarthy books because it's not as dismal. It's sad for sure, but it's not as dismal as No Country for Old Men or as awful and grotesque as Blood Meridian. It's a good place to start if you want to read McCarthy. I first read it right when Minari, that movie with Steven Yeun and Alan Kim, came out, and for some reason I was just picturing the two of them as the father and the son in The Road. Alan Kim is a little too old to play that boy in The Road now, but that version of The Road that lives in my head, starring Steven Yeun and Alan Kim with music by Silicone Boone, will always be famous. So I give The Road S tier because I have said for a long time that it is my favorite book. I do think it is now in second place simply because I read another book last month that supersedes it, and that would be The Brothers Karamazov. It's a piece of 19th century Russian literature that I think is one of the most profound things that I have ever read. It's the story of three brothers who are very, very different from each other at their horrible, horrible father who is murdered, and it looks very much like one of the brothers did it. The oldest brother, Dmitri, is a hedonist. The middle brother, Ivan, is an intellectual, and the youngest brother, Alexei, or Alyosha, is a monk. The story isn't a whodunit or a crime-solving story. It's pretty clear to the reader that Dmitri, the oldest brother, is actually innocent, even though he's not a very upstanding man. Because of the information that we as the readers know, we know that he didn't do it. The book so perfectly articulates what it means to have faith, but also what it means to have doubts. Much of the philosophical debate within the novel comes from Ivan, the intellectual and the skeptic. Everyone else describes him as an atheist. He's not. It's very clear to me that he doesn't actually know what he believes. Much of the philosophical debate within the novel comes from Ivan the skeptic and Alyosha the faithful. Ivan cannot believe in a good God because of the suffering that he sees around him. His unbelief is born out of compassion for his fellow man, but it also makes him isolated and mistrustful. I think it's never a good sign to be reading 19th century Russian literature and feeling, oh, he's just like me for real. But man, Ivan breaks my heart, dude. And his inability to solve the problem of evil manifests itself as also a lack of faith in humanity. He sees the evils of mankind and it makes him miserable. And Alyosha, on the other hand, believes in the goodness of God and the goodness of humanity, and it leads him into acts of love. And I don't know. I find myself somewhere in between the two of them. Like Ivan, I cannot reconcile the evils of man. But instead of that driving me to despair, it makes me want to act more like Alyosha. I don't have faith in the goodness of people like Alyosha does. I think that I've seen too much evil to have that childlike faith. Like Ivan, I want to believe like a child, but I can't. But my doubts and my lack of faith in humanity does not absolve me of my responsibility to love my fellow man. It's about 1,000 pages long, but I think everyone needs to read it, especially if you are a philosophical or existential or nihilistic or believing sort of person. I think there's something for just about everyone there. And it's very ambiguous what ends up happening to Ivan in the end, but I think that God finds him in the end. Ivan spends time being tormented by the devil in his living room over implied guilt and things that he said and that he maybe believes and maybe doesn't believe and maybe did and maybe didn't do. I do have a hard time talking about it as much as I love it because it's just so dense and there's so much there, and I feel like I would have to give you a history lesson and a lesson on existentialism and Dostoevsky and the Russian literature scene at the time to like fully articulate, and my complete philosophical and faith background to like really communicate just how much this book means to me. It did make me shed a tear at one point, and I know people that have said that this book has saved their faith, so I would recommend anyone who has the capacity to read it to read it. There's so many incredible ideas and passages and the relationships between the brothers who have never really known each other, didn't grow up together, but are sort of thrown together in a very chaotic and evil sort of way and are just trying to figure out what it means to live. I love Ivan. How often do you see a skeptic sort of character who is actually completely in love with life? There's just so many layers to him. I stayed up reading it until 2 a.m. I don't remember the last time that I stayed up reading until 2 a.m. That is like middle school behavior. Easy S tier. The next book I read, Trigun Maximum Volume 5. And I know that I've been so slow in putting out my Trimax videos, but I have this problem where when I love something so much, like I just can't look at it. Like my favorite movie, I've only watched 3 times because like I can't experience it more than once every couple of years because I don't know. So I've been reading Trigun so slowly because like it means so much to me. I mean, I'll make a full video about each of the Trigun volumes later on, so I won't really talk about this one at length, but it just seems like Trigun was specifically created in a laboratory to appeal directly to me because it has every single thing that I love, and so because I love it so much, it makes me crazy. I can't read it. I can't look at it for too long. I'm going to put volume 5 in... I think I'm going to put it in S tier. My goal is to finish the Trigun manga by the end of 2024. We'll see how that goes. Okay, next. Back in January, I started rereading The Hunger Games, and I got about a third of the way through Mockingjay, and I had to put it down for 2 months because I simply couldn't handle it. But I did finish it during Lent, and I was simply not strong enough. I had read the series once when I was about 12, and then a couple years ago I listened to them on audiobook. But this was my first true reread of the series as an adult, and it's just so much, dude. There's so much there. 3 of my younger siblings had not read the books or watched the movies, so we were watching the movies together, and I was rereading the books as we were watching the movies so that I could have more context for them, because I don't think I've watched the movies since 2012 or whenever they came out. I was 11 when I read those books. Where was my mom? The first time I read those books, I was Prim and Rue's age, and then me rereading them at 24 and being older than almost all the characters except Haymitch. Whole different experience, dude. Even the other characters who are young adults, Joanna and Gale and Finnick and all them, I'm older than them now. Bruh. And I had never actually seen Mockingjay Part 2 because I didn't think that I was strong enough to watch it. And so then I watched it right after I finished the book, and I had to cover my eyes at a specific part because I was still not strong enough to do it. When I tell you that a certain character death in this book damaged me more than any other piece of fiction I've ever read in my life, probably because I was 11 and not equipped to handle anything. I'm not kidding. I think there was genuine trauma wrapped up in those books for me. There's so much in there that's so relevant today, too. The role of media propaganda in our lives, mixing entertainment with violence, the line between fictionalized violence and real violence growing ever thinner, the bread and circuses, the exploitation of children, people bombing hospitals full of innocent people. Like, Suzanne, this was prophetic. It's like so close to being an anti-war narrative because of how horrible it portrays everything, but also it like teeters on the edge of a anti-war narrative and a just war narrative, because it's like, yes, this war is so evil and the people funding the rebellion are also evil and horrible, but it's like, what else are they supposed to do? You know, what else can they do? It walks some very fine lines, and it just leaves me with a lot to think about. I didn't cry while reading the book, but I did cry one time when I was just sitting in my room staring at the wall thinking about Haymitch and Finnick, the victors that are now adults, living this life as commodities. You either become a commodity or a laughingstock, never quite part of the capital because you're district, but never district because of how close you are with the capital. I think I'm going to put it at A tier because Mockingjay is very good, but I think that it is the least favorite of the series for a reason, and not because it's bad. I don't disagree with any of Suzanne's writing choices except for one. Suzanne, when I catch you, when I see you in the streets, I just think that because it's so different from the other two books, that it is the toughest read. And because it's so dismal. The other books are dismal too, but at least in the Hunger Games, you know that like Katniss is going to survive and get to go home. And then in Catching Fire, there's even like fun moments. Oh, Catching Fire is so good. But you get none of that sense of relief from Mockingjay, and that's why I think it's such a difficult read. Now I get to tell you about the most insane experience of my 2024 Lenten reading career. And that was the weekend, the 3 days in which I read all 31 volumes of Golden Kamuy. I cannot begin to describe to you what that experience was like. By the time I was done reading the last volume, I was like sweating and like shaking, and I called my friend and I was like, I'm trying to explain this to you and I can't form a coherent sentence. This is one of the most absurd, obscene, but technically perfect stories that I have ever read. I think everyone should read it, but I also think nobody should read it. It is such a bizarre story. It's so weird that anything could happen and it's not out of place. And it was one of those things that I went into knowing nothing about. And so it was very, very fun because I didn't have anything spoiled for me. A lot of things that I watch or read, I at least know something about them because someone has recommended them to me, or they get really popular on the internet and I see things about them. But this was one of those things that I genuinely knew nothing about. And so the twists and turns were shocking. Everything is so perfect about Golden Kamuy. The art, beautiful. The pacing and the plot, incredible. The characters are so much fun. It's meticulously researched. There's so much culture and language and food and everything that goes into it. And I want to make a big Mike's Mike style corkboard and string review or like recap of it in the future, so I won't go too in depth in this video. Easy S tier. I should probably tell you what it's about. It takes place in Hokkaido after the Russo-Japanese War. A young war veteran named Sugimoto Saichi is broke and wants to be able to take care of his buddy's wife and kid after his buddy died in the war. And so he's up in Hokkaido panning for gold with no luck, and he hears a legend that there's a giant stash of Ainu gold hidden somewhere in Hokkaido. The Ainu are the indigenous people of Hokkaido. One might think of them as the equivalent of the region's Native Americans. Like, not exactly, but like kind of. Sugimoto ends up teaming up with this young Ainu girl who's about 13 maybe, to try to find the gold. They quickly learn that the map to the gold is tattooed on the skins of 24 escaped prisoners from Abashiri prison, which is like the Alcatraz of Hokkaido. The tattoos are arranged in such a way that indicates that the prisoners must be killed and skinned to truly assemble the map. Now, if this random Sugimoto guy catches wind of the gold, you can imagine lots of other random and not so random guys have also caught wind of the gold. At any given time, there's no less than 3 different parties searching for gold. And alliances form and break, and people join different sides and split off and double cross. And I'm not even telling you any of the crazy stuff about it. Like, that's just the basic premise. Content warning for just about everything you could imagine and things you can't imagine. It's so balls to the wall. There's naked guys everywhere. They're eating raw brains. They're killing each other. They're double crossing each other. They're traveling up into Russia. They're killing bears. They're skinning people. They're doing it all. And the whole time, they're being chased around by this insane army lieutenant who had his skull blasted off in the war and drips cerebrospinal fluid everywhere all the time. Okay? But none of that really matters because at its heart, Golden Kamuy is a cooking manga. And it has so much heart. It's not just funny, it's also so dramatic and so heartfelt and almost made me cry at one point. There's a scene where people are shoved inside a deer carcass to survive a snowstorm. And believe it or not, the conversation they have within that deer carcass, that is the scene that almost made me cry. I had watched the Golden Kamuy anime, at least the first 2 seasons of it, back in 2020 because I had just taken a class about Japanese horror and religion, and one of the TAs was talking about how Golden Kamuy is good. I knew representation, and I did not trust his taste in anime at all. Like, no offense to him, he kind of looked like the kind of guy that would recommend hentai. He kind of did recommend me hentai. Moving on. The anime is not the greatest adaptation. It seems pretty low budget. It has some good music and some pretty good voice acting. But the animation itself, I would say, is not the most quality. The anime does censor things quite a bit. Anyway, that's Golden Kamuy. I want to make a separate video with like a lot more research because it's very, very historically accurate and just very culturally well researched in a lot of different ways. And so I want to be able to give it the attention and the time that it deserves. And if it sounds like something that you're interested in, but you don't want to necessarily read the manga with all of the things that it contains, then I will just make a video for people that don't want to do that. And then the last thing that I read this Lent was Dungeon Meshi. And I would say between Golden Kamuy, Trigun, and Dungeon Meshi, I've probably been cured of every eating disorder for life. Dungeon Meshi is a cooking manga. It's also a dungeon crawler manga. It is also a somewhat horrific manga in certain places. I've not watched the anime adaptation, but I greatly enjoyed the manga. It's basically about an adventuring party whose healer gets eaten by a dragon at the very end of the dungeon, and she teleports them all up to the surface, and they want to get back down there to try to save her because you can die in the dungeon, but you can get revived, so it's feasible that they could save her. But they don't have any money because all their stuff was down there in the dungeon and did not get teleported out, so they don't have any food. And so they decide to go back into the dungeon and just eat the things in the dungeon. The main character is extremely autistic and I love him. Okay, I want to say this without spoiling too much. There's a character who has more or less been cursed so that he doesn't desire anything. I have also been the bearer of that curse. And so just the way that he was handled, his trauma and his depression and his like learning how to live again, it struck a chord with me. How the lack of want is almost worse than having unmet desire. I would put Dungeon Meshi at A tier because I enjoyed it. It was very good. It's very well written. The art style is incredible. It was also written by a woman, points for that. It doesn't get to S because I think if I was going to list like my top 10 manga or something, I don't think it would make the cut. So that is it. That is everything that I read in between February 14th and April 1st. I would say that all of it is good. I didn't read anything bad. I'm pretty judicious. Is that the right word? I don't think that's the right word. I'm pretty particular about the stuff that I read. I have to have an idea that I'm gonna like it before I read it, so I end up liking most of the things that I read because I'm picky about it. But yeah, I think that's it, and hopefully I will be able to upload more in the future. It can either be perfect or it can be posted, and so I'm just gonna make sure that it's posted. I think that it's good for me to get my creative energy out and get my thoughts out. I hope this microphone worked. If not, I recorded for an hour and 5 minutes, and I'll have to use my phone audio. Fingers crossed. All right, bye. Oh, the shirt, by the way, I bought from Cryptid Club. I don't know if they have any left, but it says, "Hey, it's me, the thing. I want to be you." I will put a link to their store in the description.